I've tracked this expert down, and she is here to teach you how to understand, deal with, negotiate against, and even get what you want from the narcissistic people in your life. Your mom, your dad, your daughter-in-law, your ex, your boss, they're going to have no idea what hit them when you're done listening to this. So the expert today is Rebecca Zung. And Rebecca literally wrote the book on this topic. The book is called Slay the Bully: How to Negotiate with a Narcissist and Win. And here's what I really love about her take on this topic. She's a trial lawyer. I'm a former trial lawyer. I love people who think like lawyers. And on this topic of narcissism, she's not taking a clinical approach. She's attacking this topic like a litigator. She's advocating for you. And you know what? She's showing up to win. She is one of the top ranked trial lawyers in the United States. And Rebecca became an expert in this topic because she needed to get a strategy. See, she's been researching narcissism for decades. Why? So she could understand the narcissism that she was seeing in opponents and outsmart them in the courtroom. She wanted to know how they thought, how they think, their psychological disposition, and that's how she became an expert in this topic. And she's here to teach you how a narcissistic person thinks, acts, how to identify their emotional cycles and reactions, and also, and this is the really good part, their tactics, so that you can rise above it, so that you don't get sucked into it. And if you pay attention and you apply what you learn, because this is not just a listening podcast, it's a learning one, you will also master Rebecca's 4-part proven strategy for negotiating with narcissistic people in your life. And if you do that, you're going to win every single day. If you've never heard that narcissism is not something someone's born with, it is created in childhood. It is the result of repeated trauma. And what Rebecca is explaining to you, and this piece of it is critical, that the trauma during childhood, emotional neglect, physical abuse, whatever the trauma may be, it causes arrested development in the part of the brain that is responsible for someone's emotions.
Yes.
And what does that
Yes.
mean? That means that while their prefrontal cortex or their thinking part of the brain is like fully functioning, their emotional part of the brain is lagging. That's why somebody who has a narcissistic personality has so little emotional control. And when you start to understand, oh, wait a minute, the thinking part of the brain goes forward, but the emotional one literally stops. If you've ever dealt with somebody who's narcissistic, I bet they spin on a dime. I bet all of a sudden they can rage at you. I bet all of a sudden they're like irrational. And when I started to realize in my own brain, oh, wait a minute, this is something that a narcissistic person has no control over. This is why they're so unpredictable. This is why they're immature. This is why they can say such mean things and be like, I never said that. It has to do with the delay in the emotional development while the thinking part of the brain is proceeding. And this is really important for you to understand because this is not your fault.
Yes.
There is nothing you can do to change this. And getting yourself all wrapped around the axle because you got somebody in your life that tantrums at you like some 8-year-old. This is part of how the brain developed because of the, you heard the word again, arrested development in the limbic system. And this was critical for Rebecca to learn so that she could navigate the courtroom, so that she could be a savvy negotiator, so that she could get into the courtroom or into the deposition and win. Because she knows she's dealing with somebody who's super sharp in the mind, but ridiculously immature in the emotions. And this is so life-changing for you to wrap your brain around because this has nothing to do with you. And later, I promise you, Rebecca Zung is going to teach you her 4-step proven approach to negotiating with somebody that has narcissism and still winning. She's also going to give you the phrases that she likes to say that really disarm somebody with this kind of arrested development. As you're listening, I want you to think about somebody in your life that you're dealing with that either has narcissistic tendencies or is a full-blown narcissist. Maybe it's your mom or dad. Maybe it's your ex. Maybe it's a friend. Maybe it's a boss. Maybe it's a kid. Somebody in your life that really fits the description that you're starting to fully grasp. Good. You got that person? Great. Now I want you to take that person. Let's just say it's your dad. And let's shrink your dad down and imagine who's just a little kid who is experiencing a traumatic situation in their house, whether it's emotional abuse, it's physical abuse, it's abandonment, it's loneliness, it's like whatever it may be, that is their reality. And so can you explain what's going on for that little 8-year-old kid that's exposed to this, Rebecca, and how narcissism develops?
So for children who are dealing with this continuously in households where there's a lot of stress, where there's a lot of trauma, and they're exposed to this on a continuous basis, while the prefrontal cortex part of the brain continues to develop, the part of the brain responsible for judgment or other, thinking, planning, that continue to develop. And so during the rest of their lives as adults, they appear to be functioning normally. There's actually a disconnect between the development between that part of the brain and the limbic system part of their brains. And so while they are, functioning normally in one part of their lives, and now something might happen, some sort of trigger, some sort of stimuli has caused them to feel like they need to be back into survival mode. And that stimuli can be anything. And most times it's not necessarily rational or reasonable to most people, but it is to them. And it can be anything. It can be nonverbal or it could be verbal. It can be a nonverbal cue, such as an eye roll or a stance, or it could be a tone of voice. I always say narcissists hear tones like dogs hear whistles, but there's no tone, but they hear tone. So, it could be anything, but they get triggered. That thing triggers them. And because of the phenomenon called splitting that they have, where everything is black or white or good or bad or whatever, when that trigger happens, now they go from that prefrontal cortex back into the limbic system. That limbic system becomes activated. And now you're dealing with that limbic system, or they are dealing with that limbic system. And that emotionally charged state is what is taking over now at that point. And that is now that front part of their brain is no longer in charge anymore. It's their limbic system is now in charge. And when that happens, they don't necessarily remember or know what they're doing. That's what's now happening. And that when that happens, it's what's narcissistic injury is what it's called. And they will then take themselves down sometimes to take you down. The retaliation might happen. They inflict harm. They manipulate. They have little recollection of their actions at that point, and they are seemingly blind or indifferent to the collateral damage that they cause to themselves or others during that state. They are literally blinded by their actions.
We have to stop on this point right here, because what Rebecca is explaining to you when she talks about blindness and this being tied to the brain development, this changed my freaking life. And I want to take a highlighter and I want it to change your life, Because when you have somebody that is narcissistic in your life and they say, I never said that, that never happened, you're wrong, I didn't mean that, I always felt like they were lying to me, that there was this intent to destroy, right? And when I dug into the research, just like Rebecca dug into the research, and I learned that there is this term blindness, that due to the arrested development in the limbic system, which means they have little to no emotional control, right? That the emotional eruption, when they get that wave of emotion, it does override the thinking center and they completely forget what they did. And so I will say, are there narcissists that do it intentionally? Probably. But it was super helpful for me to realize that there are things that have gone down in our family, for example, in the past, where somebody with a narcissistic personality or narcissistic tendencies erupted and said some really cruel things. There were tears, there was a fight, there was upset. And it has always bothered me that the person has operated as if it never happened. And what I've come to realize is that based on the research, if it is a heightened emotional state, they might not even remember that it happened and probably never will be, because the development of their limbic system got arrested due to childhood trauma. And that's why they don't think rationally. And that's why they can't control their emotions. And that's why this has nothing to do with me.
That's exactly correct. That's exactly correct. And even beyond that, what people need to understand is when that is happening, and because that is happening, dealing with that in any situation means that you cannot communicate with them. You cannot negotiate with them in the same way that you can with a rational, reasonable person. You cannot.
Well, Rebecca, I love that you said that because we're both parents. And so just to make this as so simplistic that anybody of any age, anywhere in the 194 countries where this show is syndicated can understand it. Just like you cannot negotiate something with a 8-year-old the same way that you would negotiate with a fully functioning adult, you need to put someone who's got narcissistic tendencies into the camp of negotiating with an 8-year-old, because you're not dealing with a fully functioning, rational human being with fully developed emotional centers in the brain and the ability to regulate themselves or even understand what they're doing. Is that correct?
Yes. And I would even say an 8-year-old who's having a tantrum.
Okay. I love that. How did knowing that help you?
Oh, so much so. So much so. Hey, everybody. Thanks for watching. If you loved this interview, make sure you go check out the whole entire thing, which you can watch right here.